Right, so we're all here, and I'd like to introduce Jackie Vernewant, who is an associate professor of English at Arizona State University, working with literature history and a feminist digital media. Meg Mitchell, who, well, first of all, she's at Google as a senior researcher, and she is leading the ACL diversities, it seems like. And yeah, that's what I noted down about you.
Okay.
Pascal Fung, who's a professor of engineering at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and is a founding chair of the Women's Faculty Association at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And then we have Vinod Kumar Prabhakaran. Perfect. Okay, thanks. Who's a postdoc at Stanford and has been working with power relations and most recently with police data and discrimination. And you've all been asked to say something in 5 minutes. So if one of you will start.
Okay.
I'm going to just hold this. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Much. So I'm delighted. I just want to thank everyone for being here this afternoon, and if you've been here all day, for being here all day, because sitting in a room all day is like no small thing, right? I've had a handful of these interactions in the last 2 years, right, that bring people in CS and engineering together with people who work in industry, academic CS and engineering, and also people who work in the humanities, like I do. So I'm a feminist digital media studies scholar, but I work in a variety of different spaces. When I write books, I write them about long histories of digital technology, like going back to the 15 or 1600s. In the spaces where I'm not writing books, I'm doing things to support individual security in digital spaces. So I run something called the Human Security Collaboratory with a colleague at Arizona State University. And essentially our goal there is to use interdisciplinary methods to, try to address an issue in the security fields, right, which is that they tend not to focus on individuals in small-scale communities. We focus on a handful of different things, including digital civil rights, data disenfranchisement, and violence online, which is our topic here today. And that work on violence online is something that I've been doing for a couple of years. I had a grant through the DML media competition, which was funded by the MacArthur Foundation, to address violence against feminists online in particular. And out of that, we developed a website called the Center for Solutions to Online Violence. I think I forgot to tweet it before I came up here, but I'll tweet out links for everybody after this. But in that, we worked specifically with women of color and trans people to develop teaching resources, things that could be used in the K through 12 system, but also things that can educate, we can do peer education, journalist education, et cetera, thinking about violence against women online. And one of the things that I want to carry into this conversation from our conversation in that development is that very often academics and journalists are part of the problem rather than part of the solution, especially when we're talking about the appropriation of the work and experiences of women of color. So I think that's something that we need to be very attentive to, right? And I want to give credit to my colleagues who have done a lot of that work, people like Moya Bailey that Liz mentioned earlier, but also a collective known as the Digital Alchemists. And I also, for those of you who do natural language processing, and I take it there's quite a few of you in here, one of the things that we developed in the Center for Solutions to Online Violence was a set of power and control wheels. These are taken from the field of domestic violence, right? Thinking about how people enact power and control over partners or family members. And we've adapted them for the online environment. And they might be really interesting for people to use, right? We generally use things like language categories, various semantic categories. I'm not so sure that anyone's ever looked at using something like the power wheel for online interaction, and it might be worth taking a look at. All of those materials are available for free up online. And we were asked a set of framing questions, which I think were really fabulous and sort of got the juices flowing. The last one in the list was this: how can we recognize marginalized societies and ensure protection of them? And the biggest thing I think that I want to do with my 5 minutes is to point out that that is an us-them dichotomy, right? And in the spirit of Brianna's talk just now, right, that we all have work to do, I want to sort of bring our attention to the fact that the idea that marginalized communities exist outside of this space is fundamentally flawed, right? And in addition to bringing people in focus groups, et cetera, we need to do better having people actually participating in the research and development, right? We can't just bring users in at the end for design. If we're doing critical design, we need to do better.
Hi, my name is Margaret Mitchell. I think Sirach left out that I work in NLP. So this is my 10th year publishing in ACL, actually. A couple years ago, or it's actually about a year and a half ago, I increasingly felt that this community wasn't for me. It was just a small number of people that made me feel intensely uncomfortable. And so I made the decision for about a week that I was no longer going to participate in ACL, except I really, really love working with language, and I really like publishing about it, and so I decided change of plan. I will do as much as I can to change ACL and ACL culture in a way where I feel more comfortable. And so last year at ACL, with the generous support of Microsoft, I hosted the Women and Underrepresented Genders in NLP lunch. And then this year, I co-organized the Ethics in NLP workshop with Dirk and several others, and the Women and Underrepresented Minorities in NLP workshop that was here on Sunday. And moving forward, I'm helping to lead a new diversity and inclusion effort within the ACL. And there's a few different reasons for all of this, but one of them is that I feel like I was concerned that the ACL community was starting to hit on something like getting to local optima for solving NLP problems, but maybe missing the global. There were just a lot of areas that weren't being addressed at all, weren't really being thought about at all. For example, I worked in natural language generation for many years. I was made fun of quite a bit until recently when I won a competition with deep learning, and now people take it seriously, which is nice. But having like a focus on why this matters, for example, is something that I really wanted to see more of. I wanted to see more open discussion about creativity, about understanding things like empathy and sympathy, collaboration, humans working together with machines. And so I felt that by reaching out to more and more people, those are just my ideas, but by opening the playing field for people from all different backgrounds, we might have a better chance at getting to something like a global optimum for NLP as opposed to a local. So that's, I think, probably quickly good for me. If you want to be part of the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, email acldiversity@googlegroups.com. and I can add you to the list. Right.
Hi, sorry I lost my voice, so you're gonna have to listen to this very sexy tune for a while, especially with the wine. Excuse me. Sorry. So my name is Pascal Fon. I work in Hong Kong. I was born in China during the Cultural Revolution. And my family moved to Hong Kong when I was young. And then I moved here to the United States. There's a reason I'm telling you my life story in a way, because it's relevant. So I went through a Chinese education in my early childhood and through a very traumatic time, during a very traumatic time in our history. And I've seen a lot during that time. And then I went to British Hong Kong, under the colonial government, saluting to the Queen every day, in the all-girls secondary school, where I was told that I could not do engineering because if you like science for a girl, you should be a medical doctor. And I said I was afraid of blood. I would never be a medical doctor. But against all odds, my mother actually got some math tutor to let me study applied math as a prerequisite for engineering on my own. And then I went apply for engineering, electrical engineering programs in the U.S. and came to North America and study engineering. So within a week, I went from the all-girls secondary school to a almost all-boys classroom of electrical engineers. And then I went on. It was quite an adjustment, and being the typical resilient Asian girl, I sort of did not, speak up for a long time. Until then, my journey took me to Japan. A lot of people say one of the most sexist countries in the world, and I actually learned a lot about gender dynamics and relations while I was there. I was the only girl in the entire computer science department at the time, student. And the first day I got there and I say, I'm not serving anybody tea, because at the time graduate students in graduate schools, women students were expected to serve tea to the male students. So the first day I said I'm not serving tea, I learned the Japanese to say that. That's it. But then later on, so then I went to France engineering school, so on and so forth, and I came to the US, and then finally I started as a professor in Hong Kong University of Science and Technology 20 years ago to work in the startup university. And my goal then was to, at the time, to bring some of the know-how. I was very young, very arrogant. I thought that I could make changes in Asia, in the part of the world where I was born in, and change the culture, especially the gender, the cultural culture. I received a very humanistic education as I grew up in the West, and I saw the, strengths and weaknesses of different cultures as I lived in different countries, and I thought I would bring this know-how and hope to bring cultures closer together, and what better place to do that other than Hong Kong. It's been an uphill battle. Suffice to say that I was not very outspoken either as a young assistant professor while I was in Hong Kong. And until, it's been 5 years ago, when I saw case after case of women professor students under very sexist circumstances, it traumatized me and brought out a lot of the memories that suppressed throughout my childhood, my youth. And I decided, you know what, I never spoke out for myself, believe it or not. But I sure am going to speak out for other women. So I went to the provost. This was a new provost at the time, and he turned out to be super supportive of our concerns as women faculty. And he said, if you start this women faculty organization, I'll support you with everything. And he meant it, and he's delivered. And so what is the impact of Women Faculty Association? I think for the first time in the Asia academics, in the academic circles, we've put the gender issue on the table. I think that's the one thing we did. That was, I think it was a breakthrough step. The gender issue was never on the table, was never a topic for discussion in Asia. Or in any university. It's still not an issue to be talked about in many parts of Asia. But we helped. We're not the only ones. We helped. It's the first Women Faculty Association in Asian universities as far as we know. And we put the issue on the table. And we talked about and we changed university policies to be more family friendly. It's 2011, 2012, we had a clear anti-sexual harassment policy way late in the game after so many painful incidents. But we did it, and we're still fighting the battle because in Asia culture, this is a culture of shame. People don't share. People don't talk. I get anonymous letters from women who ask me to help them, but I can't because I don't know who they are. So it pains me, and sometimes I can't sleep thinking about these cases, and I still have to, work on my academic research and all that. So I talked about ethical and beneficial use of AI a lot these days. And one thing is that concerns me is that we do not have the same moral principles around the world. If you think cyberbullying is bad in the West, you should look at Chinese internet. All right? You should look at Asian culture where young women think it's norm that they need to get plastic surgery. Right? The parents, as young, as 18th birthday gifts, they give plastic surgery as gifts. This denial of our true worth other than our faces and how we look. Recently there's a software that came out of one of the labs in China again, which ranks your beauty. So you can do this, and you can rank your friends, you can compete against each other, and so on and so forth, all right? This is the norm there. And when I look at this, and I remember that my grandmother and my great-aunts, at the beginning of the establishment of Republic China in 1920s, 30s, they were feminists then. How much progress have we made? We have gone backwards, So, with that, I just want to thank you for letting me have this chance to talk to you. And I hope to hear your feedback and help me help others. Okay, thank you.
Hi. First of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to be on this panel, and I'm really excited to be with you all, and hope to have more conversation and hear more feedback on whatever they said. And I'm just gonna sort of talk about, I think, the question that you asked as the first question of what are the important, or what is the most important thing that I think as the community we should look into as NLP people working on abusive language detection online. So my background coming into, I've been working in NLP for 6-7 years or maybe more, and most of the work that I've been working on is interaction analysis, but my work has not been focusing on explicit abusive language detection per se. I was mostly looking for sort of subtle offensive language or impoliteness or disrespect, and so in my thesis work I looked at how overt displays of power happen in workplaces and how that shapes the workplace climate, and how power interacts with that, gender interacts with that, and female managers and male managers behaving differently, and so on. And currently I work on how police officers talk to drivers when they stop for traffic violations. So we have access to the body camera videos. It's a collaboration with the Oakland Police Department. So we look at how respectful they are, and is there racial disparities in how they talk to community members. And there's a huge difference in you stopping someone and hands on the wheel, do you have any weapons on you, whose car is this, versus hey ma'am, how's it going, your headlight is out, that's why I stopped you. See, these are two different ways of starting the conversation, and that sets the tone of the rest of the conversation, and that would affect how the community member would interact within that conversation, as well as how that person would feel about their own sense of dignity and sense of place within the community, or self-worth, and all those things, and it shapes how communities and institutions interact. And so and more recently I've been working on condescension online. So I'm interested in these subtle things that are not necessarily explicit, but they have profound impact on, they may have profound impact, sometimes even more, on how it shapes who you think you are. And I personally have faced situations where I've been in the US for 10 years, and the first 5 years I was just completely carefree. I've never experienced anything overtly racist or anything. But once I was at a wedding of one of my very close friends, a white couple, and the wedding was in this Upper West Side fancy 3-story apartment, and they're like my closest friends, so I showed up early. I was helping setting up the place, and there was a caterer that they had hired, and like, you know, when it was just me and him, and he asked me, oh, how long have you been working here? And it would not have affected me in any other place or any other situation, but that moment changed the way I now feel in America. Like any situation now I'm in, which is where I'm the only or like very few persons of color, I'm very conscious. I am conscious of what I wear, I'm conscious of how I present myself, and that didn't happen before. And it was not an abusive, in all the 3 examples that I gave were not abusive language per se, but the kind of disrespect that police officers show to the community members would affect how they feel about their community or depending on what community you belong to, or condescension, how that affects, and it disproportionately affects females, and how that affects, you know, how they feel comfortable in interacting in online sort of settings. So that's been my main theme of my work, and so while it doesn't fit within the definition of abusive language necessarily, I think it's an important thing to look into while we are getting into it. I think I'm going to stop there because there's a bunch of other things I hope that in the discussion I will bring in, and I'll talk about them. Thank you.
All right, well, so we're going to do the same thing as we did before, which is open up to the floor, and there's a question there. And just raise your hand, and I'll come racing.
Oh, hi. So as we were talking about gender, so I would say like being in computer science and tech, you see there's the guys are so much more disproportionate than girls. And then I've talked to some of my female colleagues, and then they talk about how they feel not welcome in a male-centered environment. So that kind of creates a feedback loop, right? So like there are fewer women, and because they feel even more, so more women are not coming in. So how do you feel like, how do we go about bringing about change? And because certainly at like personal level, maybe this is me just being very myopic, that I don't feel that I'm overtly on my personal level, that I'm not being and let's say I'm not being judgmental, or I'm not being hateful towards the gender, but I would like that we have a much more inclusive environment in the tech, and how do we go about that? What's your take on that?
So I can tell you what I'm doing, which is maybe a solution, but my approach has been to call attention to it, to objectively and as clearly as possible document what some of the issues are. I spent a lot of time providing resources for various kinds of micro patterns that occur, to try and help proactively sort of change the way we talk about these things, the kind of questions we ask, the assumptions that come in to what's a normal sort of conversation, and as well as really working hard to be an advocate and to organize in order to affect positive change. As Brianna mentioned, this does come with personal costs for yourself, because it's hard to deal with, and also because you become a victim of bullying. But I think that when we're open about this, when we really sort of band together in situations like this, and just be really proactive about driving the conversation forward, we do a lot of good in changing the way people interact and think about the problem, and in doing so make it a more comfortable place for everyone.
So I have something to add. This might come as women's planning to you. So, number one, we are scientists and researchers. I think one of the most powerful tools we have for social justice is to provide data, to illustrate what's happening to people who are not aware of it. So I think one of the most important moments in my university when we established Women Faculty Associations, I called for a meeting on International Women's Day of all the senior administrators, the presidents, vice presidents, provosts, all the deans and all. I asked the provost to make everybody come. I provided great tea service, beautiful flowers for everybody. Just got them there, and I show them graphs. And one of the graphs I showed was the number of faculty we have been recruiting and promoted in the last 20 years by gender, the male curve and the female curve.
Objective.
All right. It was, even the president wasn't aware of it. People were not aware of it. All right. So bring awareness as scientists is one way we can contribute. And secondly, when I was joking about women's planning, is that so there are situations, not enough to say I'm not discriminating against women, I don't hate women. You need to be more proactive in supporting your women colleagues, your women students, your women superiors even. Unknown women in the street who's being harassed by others. Any circumstances, you need to stand up for them. Because when you don't, you're complicit. As a man, you're complicit if you don't speak up. So speak up if you see something. If you see something, say something. I think this is very familiar, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to do, really.
So I think both of those are important comments, and I would amplify and then extend, right? I mean, I think what you're talking about is allyship. And I had a really lovely conversation recently with Barbara Wai, who is the Chief Diversity and Inclusivity Officer for Intel, in which we talked about some of the things that she's doing and some additional things that we at the Collab might be able to help do, right? And so she has explicitly trained male allies in the Intel teams, right? So she's seeded the population with people who understand what it means to be an ally and to help identify, right? Because one of the challenges is that as women or as people of color or as gender non-conforming people, right, the people who are the minority subject, if they speak up, they often are then punished, right? And so what you need are the people in power to speak up. So I think that's a thing. Among the other things that, we've talked about is there's a lot of good work in sort of like feminist STS thinking about pipeline issues and where pipeline leakages happen, and it turns out it's not any one single place, right? It's like a constant drip all the way down the line, right? And part of that is about our kind of accretion of suffering, right? And I think that this is, when you're disenfranchised, it's hard to keep going. So I think, recognizing that we need to bring more women, people of color, and gender nonconforming people into youth programs, right? But then we also need to support them in college and then in grad school and then at early career, right? So it's a long game, right? I mean, this is one of the things for me as a person who likes things to go quickly, is intensely frustrating, is there is no quick fix, right? And one of the things that I really appreciated this morning was the focus on conversation, right? That interacting with humans is important. So I absolutely agree that data is critical. Intel has been using data. We've been talking to Mozilla about data. And those things are really important, but it's also about human interaction, right? Because that's where much of the challenge happens.
Yeah, one point I want to add is probably something which is implicit in whenever we talk about diversity and the need for bringing in diversity is that it's not just about let's just bring more diverse people and make them feel welcome. It's actually so science and the community stands to benefit from diversity being there in our community. We will ask different kind of questions. I mean, we'll ask different kind of questions. Our research directions might be more diverse and so that is going to benefit as a society, as a community, that's beneficial. And one of the projects at Stanford what we have started working on is actually can we prove that in data and show that diverse research groups, does that produce diverse research topics? And if you bring together, say, 3 female researchers and 3 male researchers into a lab, does that, and if the 3 are working on, say, 3 men are working on 4 different research topics and the 3 women working on 5 other research topics, when you bring together, do we get 9 or 12 research topics? Does bringing together diverse groups, does that sort of start new directions? And I think that there is, it's not just an altruistic let's help them kind of, it's not an us versus them, it's a community as a community bringing all sorts of diverse groups sort of like, it's good for our community and science in general.
Okay. I want to ask a question. I'm going to do it from here, because I think logistically it's easier if we just leave the mic here, and then whoever has a question just comes here. Yes. We're learning. All right. So I wanted to ask a slightly more technical question. So Meg has mentioned style. Vinod has mentioned this example of how a police officer approaches a car can make a huge difference, right? And a lot of people here are in NLP and machine learning. I have to confess, first time, Zurich approached me and said, oh, can we do, hate speech detection? I was like, sure, let's throw a classifier at it and then look at the, we're going to go beyond machine learning. We're going to actually look at the indicative features and figure out, like, the hate speech words. And, that's a very short step to take. And, a lot of the work kind of goes that direction. I was wondering, how can we go beyond that? How can we look at style? How can we look at, conversational topics, pragmatics, right? Like, how can we as a community help? And I'd like to tie that in with, some of the things we've discussed earlier. How can this be made useful to a point where we can actually, support analyses, but maybe even also support legal arguments, where you could say, okay, we have analyzed this, and here is a score, or here we can point out how this, objectively violates certain rules. This is like a pie in the sky question, so, please go crazy with your answer, but just sort of, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't have an answer yet, but I have thoughts. Is that okay? Because we started working on this problem because of this workshop, because there's a database provided to us and we could work on it. And we did also then collect some more data from Twitter. And what we realized, to our surprise, at the end of all these experiments, and all, my student gave a poster session today, and he explained it, is that we're so surprised to find that the classifiers were not able to recognize anything but the most explicit kind of sexist and racist language. We found examples, Twitter examples with the hashtag Crooked Hillary. We were pretty sure that's all negative about her, and turns out we could only find 8% to 9%, I remember, among those tweets to be classified as abusive. Why? Because, and then I thought about this, and like, silly me, I've been trolled, I've been abused online, and how many times people use those words against me? They don't. They hardly ever do. People are very sophisticated, all right? They use sarcasm, they use metaphors, all kinds of languages, but those words. And there's a language model, but then it's also very personalized. And but we recognize it right away. You know when you're being targeted, abused, or bullied, whatever the language is. So I think the first step is that we need to go out there and get more data, right? A more diverse kind of data. And then we as a community come up with from our empirical work to come up with the categories of abusive language. And I believe we have to work on all these categories differently, with different, separately. I mean, we probably need to have shared tasks on different kinds and particular types of abusive language. We might need to look at the compositionality of this abusive language. I don't know. Maybe we need to look at... So there's a lot of work. What I feel from this workshop is that this is only the beginning, only the tip of the iceberg. There's so much we have to do.
So on the technical side, and going with this idea of like throwing a classifier at it, I think one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that words that are used in abusive and bullying contexts are often words that are not used in bullying sort of contexts. So for example, the word gay is often used in bullying contexts, and we need to be careful not to make sure that we have a ton of false positives anytime someone says gay, for example. And so this is one of the big problems with working with big data, especially on the internet, where a lot of the words that are completely reasonable in in some contexts are overused in negative contexts. And being able to sort of tell the difference between those things is, I think, a challenging NLP problem that a lot more data isn't necessarily going to solve, but really understanding more about the network of interactions, for example, and how people are responding and that kind of thing. So that's one thing on the technical side. The other thing is that I work with legal and policy and privacy. It's not for everyone, but if you're really concerned about the legal and the policy and all those things, I encourage you to be a part of that. If you can work with your senators, I get to work with my Washington Senator, Maria Cantwell, on this stuff. Just as much as you can, be involved with that as well, if you have the mindset for it, in order to A, understand what's possible, and B, inform on what's possible.
I would add that we, in literary studies and history of language, we have a concept of discursive communities. I'm sure it is operational elsewhere, but one of the things that struck me listening to papers is, and in doing a range of different work, is that people very often treat the internet as if it is a single thing, and I think we would all recognize in here that it's not, right? We've talked about different national contexts, but I think also there are different discursive communities in which certain kinds of language will be seen as aggressive and certain kinds of behaviors will be read as aggressive that might not be read as aggressive or assaultive or violent in other spaces. And so I think, you know, bigger data is not always better because it's not always the same, right? Thinking about the context dependency and the discursive practices of a particular community, I think, are really important.
I think that's one of the points that I was going to make, and I was actually talking to someone, Ryan, earlier, that we have to be, I mean, so this is not an answer, but actually thoughts on, like, when we build models, like, we have to be extremely careful that it's not representing interaction patterns of a particular community, because they may be correlated, but our abusive language detection model should not be a particular community detection model. Like, and it should not be identifying people by race or gender or something. There may be correlations there in certain words usage, and that's one thing. And two, there are certain words and certain ways of communicating that is very normal, and as you said, like in certain communities. And if we build a filtering mechanism and put that on Google or any other platform and say that these are abusive, we are basically kind of like disproportionately censoring a particular community. If that was an okay way to communicate within themselves or within that community, we are actually censoring, and that censorship is affecting disproportionately, and that's a big problem. And so, and also that raises the question of like who should have the gatekeeping sort of like responsibility or role in this kind of like discourse, like in who should make these decisions. But yeah, I think those are like ethical questions we, as technologists, we need to answer, policymakers need to answer. But yeah, like throwing a classifier at it would be like the first step, but that's like a very, yes.
And I think one of probably the most difficult category to work on is benevolent sexism and benevolent racism. You know, the number of times we get the compliments, oh, you are Asian, you're hardworking, you must be this and that. Or you're a charming woman, you will be able to get a job. You know, over the years that undermines a woman or a minority's confidence, self-worth. And these kind of things, of course, we should educate our peers not to do that, but also it's very hard to identify online. And a lot of these trolls or whatever abusers, they will use this kind of language.
Yeah.
Right?
There was actually a paper yesterday at another workshop that looked at that distinction between hostile and benevolent sexism.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yes, there she is.
I think there's someone waiting for a question. I wanted to start a new discussion topic. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I got you. Yeah.
It's not about you. I have a plan to catch. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so hi, Isabel Augenstein. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Copenhagen working in NLP. So one of the areas I'm really interested in is fact-checking. And people always mention to me in relation to fact-checking the filter bubble. So I was wondering, you talked earlier about how diversity can help to reduce, to prevent maybe in the longer term abuse online. And I was wondering if one of those things, in your opinion, could also be to help break filter bubbles. So for example, to promote content that doesn't directly fall within what users think they like. So kind of surprise content, if you know what I mean, like stealth advertising, campaigns, also.
You mean like how your proposal is that we don't filter them?
Yeah, my proposal is that there should be less filtering maybe. So I, as a late 20s white female person, I get lots of ads from people in, for bikinis, also white female about my age. So why do I get them? Because that's my demographic. Why don't I get, for example, ads for black models showing bikinis? I don't really see those often. And why is that? It's because, those ads are targeted towards me. And I think that's a really big problem. And do you think this could be part of the solution?
Ironically, before 2013, Facebook ads were completely random and therefore diversified. You will get those ads. But ever since the advent of personalization and recommendation engines, we do have the problem of the balkanization of opinions. For that reason, I don't block people on my Facebook. It's not an invitation to troll me, okay? But I don't block them because I want to see, I do want to see people who don't agree with me, because 90% of my friends, all of you here, agree with me. But that is that double-edged sword of recommendation engines. I don't know what to say about that. But what I would like to see is to use that recommendation engines in a positive way. For example, I am for freedom of expression. So if the trolls want to troll, let them troll. But I want to protect the potential victims by flagging to them, this message you're about to see might be, abusive. You can choose to see or not see it. If we can do that, it will be very helpful, especially for youth. Maybe the parents can choose to turn on that filter, or we don't need to turn it on, and so on and so forth. If we can flag that, right? So that's not I don't know whether that's a filter. It's almost like the spam filter, where you can choose to see and not see it, right? I think if we work hard on this problem, we should be able to do that pretty soon. For number one, the most explicit ones, and number two, otherwise. And it's up to the reader to choose what to read or not. So that's what I would like to see. Yeah.
This is hard, and I'm cognizant of the fact that we're low on time. I think encountering difference is important, right? And so I actually think hyper-targeting, hyper-personalized stuff is quite dangerous, right? This idea that essentially the internet becomes a mirror of your data shadow. To me, as a person who works on data shadows, right? Like that is a real problem, right? I think making people aware of how that happens is useful. I think allowing people to block that kind of optimization is quite useful, right? Because then they can see something different, a much messier internet. But I also think that, I don't know that this is hard, right? Because earlier I said, can we filter for things, right, rather than filter out things? And so there's a part of me that wants to say, oh yes, we should filter for instead of filter out. But I think it's a tricky problem, right? And any filtering is going to create unforeseen conditions, which I think is part of what we've seen with the filter bubble phenomenon.
So that suddenly reminds me of something. If news feed becomes like music feed, for music streaming, we have the choice of I want what I always liked and I want discovery, right? If we can have that choice, which can be done for news and all that, then we can have a mix, the kind of mix I would like to see, which is I want to discover, I want to find, I want to discover new ideas and people who have, then if we have that choice for news feed as we do have for music feed, I think that will help. But that's up to Facebook and these companies to provide that service, right?
But Do you think we should work with them or try to get them to improve their products to do this or enable this?
I think some of us should start a company, a startup to do this, and beat them at their game.
And then become like Facebook and Google are that big, and then another person would like. No, I really don't have much to add to what, I mean, I do agree that like the challenge of like filter bubbles or that limits, but at the same time we do have the need to filter things out, and I don't really have an answer to it other than like what they have already contributed, so it would not take time.
Okay, someone else had a question, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
We're already over, actually.
So we can stop the live stream and let her ask a question.
I think they have closing remarks.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you for a really interesting panel, and you too, Mike.
So can we let them ask the questions after your closing remark?
Well, I guess if you want, yeah. But we do also have dinner. We should get through.
I don't need to eat. I would like to hear. Actually, I want to hear more comments from the
Yeah, no, I'm
audience.
really, I think this is a really, really nice panel, or I think
Yes.
it's been a really great day all
Yeah.
It
together.
has been a great
And I was just sitting and trying to summarize what we've talked about today, and we've talked about a lot and very diverse things. I don't really have a good summary, but we've gone over a lot. Mike. Oh, right, yeah. All right, but well, do people want to look at pictures of animals that are cuddling?
I think that's a yes.
Maybe. No.
With the regular dongle? Yes, sir.
All right, but before I start, I'd like to apologize for asking for people's gender identity in a group setting. I didn't think it through, and I'm really glad that there were some people who spoke out and corrected me. All right. Right. Okay, while Joel is fixing this, I can say that I would like to start by thanking the people who made this happen. Why don't I have my presenter notes? Right. I'd like to start by thanking the people who made this happen. First of all, my co-organizers, who I have learned a lot from during this process. And then ACL for hosting us. I need my notes. Our sponsors, our reviewers, our speakers for introducing gravity and ... No, for introducing the gravity of these tasks and what it actually means to be subject to abuse in several ways. Our panelists for sharing incredible insights, and I don't really know how to summarize that. That's been amazing. To all authors and to everyone here who is participating. I really don't know why my presenter notes are not showing. And yeah, and then a thanks to all of our sponsors. First of all, the Malcolm S. Forbes Center for Cultural and Media Studies, who have been our principal supporter. Okay. So, when we started this, one of the motivations that before Wendy even came in, was that we wanted to have this be intersectional, or not intersectional, we wanted to be interdisciplinary, because we realized that, well, while we as technologists might be able to build systems, if we don't consider all the aspects and all the sides of complex issues like this, our systems will inherently be wrong, or probably be wrong and missing things and considerations that we should have had. And thankfully, there are fields who've been thinking about abusive language for decades. And so, yeah, I think we succeeded in having a really rounded debate. And okay, so a little bit about the numbers. We had 14 accepted papers and 21 submitted papers, which gives us 66.666% acceptance rate. I would have liked to see that there would have been more diverse institutions submitting. Most of the institutions were from Europe. We only had Qatar, Hong Kong, and Taiwan as institutions outside of Europe and the US. For panelists, we had 2 regions, which was the US and Hong Kong, for a number of reasons, but we got really nice panelists, and our speakers were both North America based. As far as, well, assumed gender, we did really well in that most of the assumed gender for most people, or for our papers, both accepted and rejected, is about 50%, which is nice, I think. And yeah, things we've covered today, a lot. We've covered everything from policy, legal frameworks to technological frameworks, considerations we should have based in gender studies and digital media studies, and yeah. And that's it. To leave you with another cute picture. And yeah, thank you all for coming.
I just want to add one quick thing. Well, it's been great working with all of you over the last 9 months, and thanks again, of course, for Brown and Forbes for allowing so many great people to come in. There's a lot of different topics that Sarah told us, and as we've seen. If you have any comments or thoughts about what we could do for next year, if anything, don't hesitate to email any of us at abusivelanguageworkshop@gmail.com or see us there tonight or wherever. Because I think, I don't know, how many people would like to see this happen again next year? Okay, all right. All right. That answers my first question. So if you have any other additional thoughts about like how best to pull things off or areas we can improve on, tell us. All yours. Yeah.
And we have funds to do something major at Brown in 2 years. So if people have ideas of collaborations, projects that you all want to start working on, let us know.
So start hiding some data.
You know, one way of collecting abusive data, if I want to collect any abusive language, I just have to post something praising. I just have to post something praising Hillary Clinton. I will get tons of those.
I don't know if Brianna is here, but I was talking to her before she spoke, and she's like, yeah, I have all this like hate mail and hate tweets from people, and I was like, you should give it some. I can give it to you all. Like, if you guys want it, I was like, I bet if you said, does anybody want data, like my personal data for the last 5 years, Twitter-wise, I imagine like everybody in the room would just raise their hand and be like, give us these.
Is there a way we can collect them? If I go to a group and say, anybody will volunteer to submit the kind of whatever, how do you
we could use the Twitter API and get their authentication token, and then we can pull in their mentions.
The idea of community-informed consent can be a useful one to look at rather than just scraping Twitter without assuming that people are in conversations and
one thing I've learned being in different industry places, you have to be very, very careful about data. Not all industry places are very careful, but especially if you're scraping things, and you make that data set public, and those person's tweets are out there, that's sort of like, it can be a double whammy for the person.
So just thinking about Twitter and from an API perspective, from a developer perspective, there are definitely terms and conditions that we probably should all review before we start scraping stuff. But I remember one of the things is that, and this occurs on other data sets, if you've looked at any other Cobra on Twitter, often they just give you the ID, and then there's a script for checking the API for that particular tweet, because some tweets get taken down or deleted, and then you are not allowed to use those. So that's at least one thing to double check for.
I think also I would encourage the community that even if it's allowed by Twitter, that you engage with the people whose tweets you might be harvesting. I mean, obviously, if we're talking about working with Brianna, and she consents, that's a thing, right? But one of the things that we heard very, very clearly in the CSOLV work, right, was Black women are out there, they're doing this intellectual labor, and then people like us, right, are harvesting things, studying it, getting publications, getting jobs while they're not. So if you would like, we were both there, it was challenging. We can talk at length about what community consent might look like.
In the back is Gideon Mann, who does the Data for Good program.
Oh, well, thank you. So, I was actually going to say, one of the, I've seen a bunch of people from Google here, but I think it would be wonderful to engage more people from Twitter directly and from Facebook directly and figure out how to get them here. Because I think solving a lot of this is going to be engaging with those companies at a deep level, and they don't always know exactly how to engage and who to engage with, but I think if they were at least here, that might be a good first step.
And just following up on that a little bit, one company that I haven't heard mentioned, and I don't know if anyone's there from, that's actually doing some of this is OkCupid. I know they have actually rolled out a abuse filter that I've heard people, especially women on the site using, that does exactly what our earlier panelist commented on, flagging, this may contain abusive language, do you want to see this or not? So I have no idea who's responsible for that, but another company that has tons of very interesting, very sensitive, potentially data. But
so for data, I've been thinking about this. If we can't just put this data out there, but we could potentially have some server where the data lives, and people can access it with tokens, and after they've requested access. I'd be more than willing to be the point person on this, but I would need help from other people. So please email me